Okay, welcome to another edition of The Amazing Adventure, Discovering the New Me. This is study number 38. We've gone through 31 episodes in the book, The Amazing Adventure. These are Bible characters all the way in a chronological order through the Bible, starting with creation story, God, Adam, Noah, all the way through Abraham, and the major characters then in the New Testament with Jesus, Peter, Paul. And now that we ended up with the Revelation because we did an extra auxiliary story of John, which isn't in the book, but I wanted to do him the Gospel of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John epistles, and the Revelation. We did that in 4 parts, and it's really cool because we end up with the tree of life in the last book of the Bible, which is Revelation 22, and now we go back to Genesis. We're going to start over and go through each book of the Bible, and we see in Genesis chapter 2 the tree of life, and so it just kind of comes back to the source, which is God providing His life for us, walking after our true identity once we come to Christ and by faith rather than after our own selves. And we'll see how the story unfolds and man tries to live life in his own strength, and we'll see that that doesn't really work too well. Revelation was really cool because we saw the seals in 6 and 7, chapter 6 and 7. Then we saw the trumpets in 8 through 11. And then again, the bowls are poured out in chapter 16. And the seals are kind of the preparatory for the trumpets and the bowls. And those kind of correlate, kind of overlapped. And we see that in the Revelation. Then we see in chapter 19, Jesus returning again to set up his eternal kingdom with all his saints from all time, with the church. But now we get back to Genesis, and we see in the beginning God creates the heavens and the earth, and He said that there was darkness over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was there roaming over the water. So it's really cool to see the Spirit of God, the Father, the Spirit, and then we see the Son in the rest of the first part here in Genesis, when He says in 26, God said, "Let us make man in our image and likeness, let us." So there's that Trinity again. And He made man, us, after the creation of the animals and the birds and the fish and the sun, moon, and the stars and the light, the day and the night. It's kind of interesting because back in Revelation, when we see the new heaven and new earth, there's no night because the throne of God lights up everything all the time. So it's going to be a great day, and we don't have to go to sleep at night. We just get to be awake all the time. It's going to be awesome. But in the beginning, God created it that way, the day and the night. And He created us, mankind, in His image and likeness. So we had His image, and we had His likeness, like we could think, feel, choose, and imagine. But we lost the image in chapter. It's kind of interesting because in chapter 2 He starts over again, just like in Revelation. If you remember in chapter 12 when we went back to the birth of Jesus with the coming out of Israel, the land of Israel. And so He kind of started the story again after He'd already gone through pretty much the whole story. Now He does the same thing in chapter 1 here in Genesis, where He talks about the creation, let us make man in our image. And then He starts in chapter 2, and He says He makes man out of the dust of the ground. And then we see Eve come along. So it's kind of interesting how these writers do that. And then in chapter 3, we see the serpent. And that was a creation of God, created this evil. He didn't create him evil, but I guess he had a choice, and he decided to rebel against God, and he tempted Eve. And God said He created the 2 trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And God said, "I don't want you to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil." So He gave him a choice. The serpent, and He said, "If you do eat of it, you will die." The serpent came and said, "You will not die." So he lied. So that's what the serpent does. That's what the enemy does. And Eve took the bait, took the fruit, ate it, gave it to Adam. He ate it, and they died. So they did what happened, what God said happened. And then God came along. They didn't die physically, boom, right then and there, but they died in their spirit. They lost the image of God. And that was marred. It became sin. And God came to them in the garden. He was walking in the cool of the day, It's kind of neat because God wasn't panicked. He wasn't worried. He pretty much knew what was going on. And he said, "Where are you?" He knew where they were, of course. They said, "We're hiding, we're afraid, we're ashamed." He said, "Why?" "Because, well, did you eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil?" They said, "Yes." But they blamed each other. And so Adam blamed Eve blamed the snake. So God instituted his curse on the different, on the snake, on the serpent. He said one day there'll be one that comes along that will crush your head, he was prophesying about Jesus coming. But he said the snake would get a bite in the heel. So that's like Jesus was crucified, died, buried, but then he rose from the dead, victorious. And that's a great verse in chapter 3 there. And then we get over to chapter 4, and we see, well, they were sent out of the garden first. God sent them out to protect them from eating from the tree of life, so he was a loving. Also, it's really neat to see that God, even though they tried to provide fig leaves for their clothing, God provided them animal skins. That's another picture of Jesus when he had to shed the blood of an animal to provide the skins, the covering, to cover their sin, their shame. And that's what God does in a loving way. And then he sent them out of the garden so they wouldn't eat from the tree of life because he wanted to protect them from living forever in that state. He wanted to give them a new state one day. And then we see that out in the garden they had Cain and Abel. And then we see that Cain kills Abel because he's jealous, he's upset, he's angry. And just the sin begins to spiral down from there. And in chapter 5 we see Enoch and Lamech, and he had multiple wives, and crazy guy there. And then we see Noah come on the scene in chapter 6, and it says that he was blameless and righteous. So he was a different kind of guy. Everybody else was wicked and evil continually, the Bible says, and God was grieved in his heart, so he's going to destroy all mankind and start over with Noah. And he asked Noah to build the ark. So Noah built that ark, and he brought the animals to the ark so they would be protected, so they could begin to propagate once they got off the ark after the flood. They had the 40 days, 40 nights in chapter 7, 8, and 9. You can read that. And then finally the water subsided. They were able to get off the ark, and they worshiped God. There was a rainbow in the sky to show that God had promised never to destroy all mankind by flood again, which is beautiful. And then we see the genealogies. Actually, in chapter 9, we see Noah building a vineyard, and he got drunk. And so we think Noah's the righteous, blameless person, and he is in his identity, but he still has flesh. He's still human. And he got drunk, and something happened with one of his sons. He cursed his son Haman's son, Canaan. And we see that played out throughout the rest of the story, how Canaan is a people that went astray from God. God, we see in chapter 10, the genealogies, and 11, we see those people trying to build a city and a tower to the heavens. So they're using the bricks to build, and they were all one people at that point, one language. And God said, they can do whatever they want now because they're all unified. We're going to spread them out. So he cast dispersed people across the world and changed their languages so they couldn't, do what they were trying to do. Is they were trying to, again, in their flesh, build a tower to become like a god themselves, to get to the heavens, instead of allowing God to do things in and through their lives. And don't we see that today? I mean, we're doing the same thing today. We're trying to build this one world unified deal so that we can be our own gods of our own ship. But God's not going to let it happen, as we saw in Revelation already, when he comes back and destroys all that. And then, so we wrap it up after the Tower of Babel, going into chapter 12. We're going to stop right there in Genesis 11. And then we're going to see the rest of Genesis now from 12 on, because the promise comes to Abraham. And God's promises for a new people that will be able to live in harmony with God, like he had Adam and Eve in the garden. But Abraham fails. We'll see that he's not the one. Moses isn't the one. He has his own failures. David, the king, let's have a king. Is he the one? No, he's not the one. So we'll see all through the Bible. And then finally, Jesus comes on the scene, and he is the one. And we see how he confounded the religious leaders with being the Son of God and claiming to be equal with God and to be God. And then we see them crucifying him and killing him for that. And then in Revelation and in the Bible, we see him coming back again and destroying all evil for all time and setting up his eternal kingdom. So it's an amazing story, the Bible. We need to continue to read it. I was going to do this one on Thursday, then I waited for Friday. I did more study. Then this is Saturday. I'm doing even more study. And you gain even more insight the more you read it. And it gives you a worldview that we need today, because there's every wind of doctrine and the waves are crashing in and things are happening, and we need to be solid, and we need to know who we are in Jesus, and we need to walk after that, not after the flesh in these days. God bless you.